Hey everybody, this is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. Here we go. At UNBOSSED, I interview amazing women in Chicago. There is so much woman power in this city that I want to provide these women a platform to tell their story. Please connect with us and please consider supporting by sharing, liking, commenting the podcast. Tell all your Netflix friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for a guest, subscribe on your favorite podcast app, and donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. I hope you enjoy and welcome to the show. Genevieve Custer Weeks was born and raised in Madison, Wisconsin. She received her early ballet training there and took part of her first dance productions in the middle of her parents' living room. At the age of 15, Genevieve moved to Chicago to study at the School of Ballet Chicago, and that same year became the founding member of the Ballet Chicago Studio Company. In addition, Genevieve supplemented her training with study at the San Francisco Ballet School, American Ballet Theatre, and with Suzanne Farrell at the Kennedy Center. A contract with the Oakland Ballet brought Genevieve to San Francisco Bay Area. Beginning in 2006, Genevieve began performing as a freelance artist, dancing principal and soloist roles throughout North America, and started dreaming of opening her own boutique school that would celebrate the things she loved most about ballet. During a break in her performance schedule, Genevieve's husband Andrew finally asked, "Why wait?" And Tutu School was born. Since the founding of that first initial studio, Tutu School has grown into a collection of more than 40 boutique ballet schools all over the US and Canada. And Genevieve, who retired from performing in 2012, now divides her time between Tutu School and her life with Andrew, a photographer, and their 3 adorable kids. Welcome, Genevieve. Hey everybody, this is Marina, your podcast host at UNBOSSED. Today, my guest is Genevieve Custer Weeks, founder and CEO at Tutu School Franchises. Welcome, Genevieve.
Thank you for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I was actually just telling you the way I found you and found your company is because I want to put my 4-year-old daughter in ballet class. And there's so much conversation to be had about like girls and boys doing ballet, and it's funny, you own a tutu company and you have 3 boys and I have 3 girls, and the things I teach them about, non-gender specific, but a lot. But before we go right into that awesome stuff, do you want to tell a story about you and maybe growing up, were you always into dancing, and how did you find yourself like really becoming a dancer as a professional career?
Yeah, I think sort of the founding of Tutu School is really rooted in why I became a dancer too. I just grew up in this household where there was always music playing. I was thinking about the other day because it was my dad's birthday and I was like pulling together some thoughts and stuff for him. And I think it's because of him. Like he was just always playing music, and could be anything. It would be like Tchaikovsky, but then Bob Dylan and the Beatles, and, like random musicals. Like it was just, he had really eclectic musical taste, and there was always music playing. And so I was that kid who was just always dancing in the living room and making up shows, and it was so formative for me to just have this safe space where I could move to music and really be imaginative and be creative and find myself, and so really, I think it was a very natural transition for me into ballet lessons, and once I was in the studio, and I really fell in love with that and wanted to just pursue it seriously. I kind of knew that pretty early on. And so, Tutu School was sort of born out of that idea that I thought, well, I believe in the power of that for all kids, but maybe not all kids have that in their lives. And we can be a place where that happens. We can make that space to be creative and be joyful. So Tutu School is sort of born out of, what I experienced in my living room growing up. And I think what I experienced in my living room growing up is what led directly to me wanting to have a career in professional ballet.
That is so cool. And what was the thing though that inspired you to like start dancing? Was it like a talent that was recognized by your parents, and how did that happen exactly?
Yeah, I mean, I think they sort of similar to, what we see at Tutu School now, which is like that signing your kids up for ballet lessons is still very much a milestone moment. So I think they were sort of like, oh, she's dancing around the house, we should put her in ballet. And so that's what led them to do it. But then once I was in there, I just really did fall in love with it. It would be a struggle at different times to stay engaged when it got more serious, when it got harder. But I just always really felt most like the most true version of myself, the most expressive version of myself when I was moving to music. And there was nothing that could sort of match that. And so it was like once I'd experienced that, the technique and all the training and everything, that's sort of the framework that then you have to learn to support it. But that feeling that you have when you're just getting to move through space to music, if you're somebody that affects, it's like a drug, and you're like, okay, now that I felt that, like I need to keep having that again, and I want to experience it on stage. I want to be in rehearsals doing that all the time. So that was really just what I followed. And once I got hooked on that, I identified that as my dream, then I think that it wasn't so much that anyone saw that I, had some incredible talent. I think people identified with what they could see I was feeling when I moved. Like, I think that was something people were drawn to. But I think I was one of those dancers that then just like, it was a grind. Like, I just really worked really hard. And some of it is, the ballet world is so competitive that a lot of it's natural ability. But a lot of it is just attrition. It's like who's standing at the end of it, because it's so competitive, and who can really stick with it. And I was so devoted to it that I was in it for the long haul. So I made it through some injuries. I made it through a ton of auditions. I ended up getting a contract with Oakland Ballet. So I trained here in Chicago at Ballet Chicago, and I got a contract with Oakland Ballet that took me to California, and danced there for a little bit. And then actually not too long after I'd moved out there to the Bay Area, they folded due to financial difficulties, which was really awful and traumatic. And so then I had to start freelancing. So it was actually it was like at all these different points in my journey of being a professional dancer, there were moments where it felt like, okay, maybe this is a sign to stop. It was like when I had a serious injury as a teenager, or when I, had to do a ton of auditions to even get a contract. Then when my company folded, so it was like, there are all these moments where I could have stopped. And instead it felt like it kind of just reinforced it. It's like, no, this is what I need to do. This is what I really feel so called to do. And just sort of kept finding a way. So I ended up finishing my career doing a lot of freelancing gigs. And that was actually the bulk of my performing time, was traveling around to do different contracts. And then that sort of led directly to Tutu School, because in between gigs I would teach too. So that's how I found that I fell in love with that.
That's such a cool story. And what a primer for starting a business as well.
Yes. I would never have, like, if you told me that at the time that it was great training for starting a business, I wouldn't have believed you, but looking back on it, it absolutely was.
Yeah, like there's injuries and there's foldings and there's
right. It's just a roller coaster, and it's all about perseverance.
So you didn't choose to do this once, but twice already.
Yes, exactly. I do think that's interesting you say that, because I do think you can kind of look at a performing career as a form of entrepreneurialism, because you're, I don't think dancers think about it that way, because you're auditioning to get a job and get hired, but it's like so much of it really is like managing your own career and nurturing your own career. And so I think it is kind of like being an entrepreneur.
Nice. So it was definitely a natural transition. And so you danced for a long time before you started to open up Tutu School. And we were chatting earlier about definitely like what it take to then grow the business. But at the beginning of the concept of Tutu, what maybe propelled you to actually decide to, like, this is the moment where I'm going to open up the first location?
Yeah. So like I said, I was freelancing, and in between freelancing, I, in different gigs, I was teaching at local schools in the Bay Area. And one of them in particular, they put me in charge of their preschool division. And I fell in love with that age group. And I always say, like, when I'm talking to, new potential Tutu School owners or new teachers, I say, it's like, you kind of have to be a special kind of crazy to love hurting like a room full of 3-year-olds. It's not something where I think like, oh, wow, I was so gifted at this. I'm like, no, you have to be a little loopy to be like, yep, that's what I want to do. but I loved it. And I think the reason why I loved it is because of what we already touched on, that it brought me back to what I believe in the most about ballet, which is just that transformative power of putting somebody in a space with music and letting them move to it. And so the fact that I got to be a part of introducing that to these kids and making that space for them and then guiding them through it. And then also an important component for me was I started introducing them to classical ballet stories. So they would learn about Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake and the Firebird and Nutcracker, and I would use those stories to teach them too, and to really sort of, just engage them with music and movement. And I just loved it. And so I started thinking about, like, hey, what would it look like if we had a school that was just focused on this age group, where it really was just, let's do one thing, let's do a magical introduction to ballet, and let's make every single part of the program be focused on that. And it was interesting because once I started thinking about that, like, I was looking at the traditional dance schools I'd attended and the ones I was teaching at, and they usually teach, like, all ages, all styles, and the little kids are sort of an afterthought. It's like somebody go teach the 3-year-olds on a Saturday morning, and there's no like special training for what was developmentally appropriate. There's no tailored curriculum for what actually makes sense for those kids. It's kind of just like a watered down version of what the older dancers are doing. And it's like these big cavernous warehousey spaces, smelly, sweaty studios. There's not much that's like inviting or nurturing about it. And so realizing that we could take all of those things and really craft this experience that would be just for very young dancers. 18 months old, we start at Tutu School at 18 months old and go up to 8 years old, because that's when you would need to start more formal study if you wanted to. I got really intrigued by that idea, like making this boutique ballet experience. And then I guess the sort of budding entrepreneur in me and businesswoman in me was looking at these classes at these schools I was seeing and teaching at, and realizing they were the classes that were full. Like, those were the classes that had the waiting list. Because again, it's still this milestone moment that parents are like, all right, let's sign them up for their first ballet class. Let's sign them up for their first dance class. And so I really identified, not just this pull that I felt like this is something I was passionate about, but also the fact that it seemed like there was a real hole in the market and a real business need.
Nice.
So we decided to start it.
Was there something, and maybe it was nothing, but was there something that was like that really like pushed you to just actually do it, or you just naturally driven and you were like, okay, this is the year that I'm going to start my school?
I think what I'm really lucky, I would love to believe that no matter what, I would have started Tutu School, but I was really, really lucky in my choice of partner. My husband is incredibly supportive. And so when I started having this idea and I told him about it and I said, okay, I think when I retire, I definitely saw this as something I would do after performing. And so I said, I think when I retire, this is something I might want to do. And I think in retrospect, if it had stayed this sort of like far off, at some point in future years, I'll do this, I wonder if I would have lost the momentum, and maybe it wouldn't have happened. And his immediate response was, he said, why wait? If you have this idea, like, why wait? And I think that was so important, because it was like, I also, you hear about people who have amazing ideas and choose to share them with somebody, and people kind of poke all the holes in them and they kind of immediately deflate and maybe, have to fight through that or abandon it. And I was very lucky that the first person I shared it with just had the immediate response of like, yeah, do it. Why? And also, why would you wait? Yeah. And so I think because I immediately started, it was one of those things where it was like, okay, well, so maybe we'll do this in a year. But then it was like, I started working on the logo and the business plan and what would it look like. And then once the real kicker was once we started looking for spaces, and it's kind of like, house shopping or something where you're like, well, just look, we're not going to get anything. We're not going to fall in love with anything. But once you start going and looking at potential spaces, which we did just to sort of research, then we found one right away. Well, not right away, but pretty quickly. Yeah. And then before you knew it, it was like, okay, we're, I guess
opening this thing.
Yeah, really, really pretty quickly. In retrospect, it was a pretty fast timeline.
Oh, that's such a cool story. I love that. And I'm so happy that you found a partner that is really open. And also, like, you share the idea with the right person. Like you said, it's so easy to just share your ideas with the wrong people that do not, like, ideas are never perfect. And so there's a need to cultivate them, even if they're not great, to see where the potential of those things could go. And so that's amazing. does he now gets credit for opening this business with you?
Oh, I think for sure. I think he would absolutely take that. I always joke with him because he played hockey very seriously. He's a
Yeah.
photographer. And that, yeah, when he played hockey through, into college. And I'm like, if anyone had told you, and he's 50% owner with me.
Okay.
I run the business, but I'm like, if anyone had told you that you were going to be a 50% stakeholder in a ballet business, I'm pretty sure you would have a lot of questions, but he's happy to take credit now.
That's awesome. So, going back to a little bit into like how your career was like, and maybe like a little bit more relevant for today's times is like this concept of diversifying industry that are, driven by minorities, and ballet seems to be one of those businesses. Can you tell me about like your exposure to diverse ballet artists or professionals throughout, yeah, and how maybe you aim to change that with your school, or how it has changed with time? Because I know the ballet dancer Miss Copperfield.
Misty Copeland?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Misty Copeland,
Yeah.
that's who it is. But that's basically all I know about Black women in ballet.
Yeah, no, well, it's a big problem. Ballet has been in need of diversity for quite some time, and it's obviously it's a many like it needs to be approached from a lot of different layers. And fortunately, I think that we're getting a lot more attention towards that now. But it's something that I think matters a lot, and I feel like we do have a real role to play because it starts, it's one of those things where it's like, because you train for so long to become a ballet dancer, if you don't start when you're young, it's not something where, we can go catch up from the top down. It's like, it really has to start by, providing opportunities to lots of different communities so that we can get more diversity in ballet. And so obviously I feel like there's a huge role for Tutu School to play there. And a lot of it is, some of it's as simple as representation, is making sure that like in our messaging and in our marketing and in those ballet story time stories that I was telling you about, that kids are seeing ballerinas and dancers in those pictures that, look like them. And that they're not, that not all the dancers that they're seeing are white, because for a long time at all of the nation's best ballet companies, they were all white. And so that's been sort of one of the sort of some of the low hanging fruit. Some of the easiest things to do are, okay, let's make sure that we're showing, like in our pictures, all of our students are seeing beautiful Black ballerinas and brown ballerinas in the pictures that they're looking at and aspiring to. That's big, but I think it also comes down to, again, opportunity and making sure that all kids have access to these lessons and then to the training that they would need moving forward. So we've at Tutu Schools partnered with an amazing organization called Brown Girls Do Ballet. It's wonderful. And so we actually, you mentioned Misty Copeland. We did like a big fundraiser with her book that she had coming out, where she signed a bunch of copies that we sold. That was a fundraiser for them. We've done a few other different things, and we continue to partner with them and sponsor scholarships, because I think so much of it is actually just about opportunity and access. And then as well as, and in tandem with, I think some of the larger structural things at the ballet company level that need to be addressed, but then also just the pure representation factor, so that we make sure that all kids think it's an avenue that's open to them. If that is a dream of theirs, we want them to know it's a possibility, because sometimes you have to see it first, right? And if you can't see it, then you're not going to know that. So I think we have to come at it from all of those different directions. And I am really lucky in that when I was at Oakland Ballet before it folded, I danced under one of the only Black female artistic directors. An amazing woman, Karen Brown, who had been a principal dancer with Dance Theatre of Harlem, which is a historically important ballet company, because it's a company that's all Black dancers. And so I did have I did have that fortunate experience. Because of that, Oakland Ballet was more diverse than a lot of other ballet companies, but I still really got to see, I don't think I had the appreciation, frankly, that I should have for it at the time. Like, I've realized it now more with a lot of the reflection that we've been doing in the last year, but I did get to see up close, even in a setting like that, where there was more diversity than at your average ballet company, that there were still all these hurdles and challenges that my Black colleagues and brown colleagues had to face that I didn't. I mean, simple things like what they would have to go through to get their point shoes to be match the color of their skin. Like I would just take my peach point shoes out of the package, sew the ribbons on. I had to do a lot to get them ready to dance in. But one of those things, one of the things I did not have to do was to adapt those point shoes to match the color of my skin. So simple things like that you don't think about, or maybe don't sound like that big of a deal to somebody else, but it's like, the message that sends, if you have to alter the actual equipment to even perform or rehearse or whatever, that tells you right off the bat, like, this wasn't designed for you. This isn't something that's automatically open or accessible to you. So those are the things that are changing in the industry now. And, obviously way too late, but I'm still really glad to see it. And I think it's important that Tutu School is a part of driving that.
Wow. That's a really interesting example because of, I'm assuming they would have to paint somehow their shoes right before practice, probably right after practice, before shows. And it's not like somebody else will paint them for them.
No. And I think, and I posted last summer when there were like a lot of these conversations happening in the ballet industry about changing this. I had posted on my social media at one point and just said, I'm so sorry to like my Black and brown colleagues that I think frankly, because as dancers, we do so much of that sort of stuff as preparation. And like I said, there's a lot of responsibility you take as dancers for your whole career and your equipment, that I would watch them do that and just sort of thought about it as like, oh, well, this is how I darn my point shoes or sew my ribbons. I really didn't process that. I was like, what does that, truly, what does that feel like? That it's like, I have to even paint my point shoes, or, they had different methods. Different people would handle it differently. Some would use makeup to pancake them, or some would dye them. But what does that feel like? Again, that there are all these extra steps that you have to go to, not just to make them fit like the rest of us do or wear them the way we want to, but just even to match the color of your skin, who you are. And I really did not grasp that even when I was seeing it right in front of me.
Wow. What an awesome lesson though to look back at and really like apply to your school. I applaud you for doing that, and it sounds like successfully in many ways. So thank you for thinking about that and taking that on.
Thank you. It's so important, and we are still looking all the time for new ways, so it's like there will continually be new things that we'll think about, or we'll say, like for a number of years we had still said, like pink tights were the norm, and pink tights were evolved out of this like very, European tradition. And as a white dancer, I was like, well, my skin's not pink, so I didn't think about that. And so we would still say for recitals and stuff like, okay, pink ballet shoes and pink tights, and that was something that's now gone out, that we say tights and shoes, and we make sure that any of our schools that are
Nice.
selling retail, we encourage them to sell, retail and that match all skin shades. So we're still definitely always looking for new ways, and we're still learning. So I think that that's the important thing, is that we're open to it and that we keep moving forward.
I have to tell you, you nailed it. That's why I'm not a dancer, is because I had to wear pink tights that didn't match my skin color, so I decided to just give it up.
I mean, right though?
It was totally something that I thought about when I was dancing, and I was like, oh, well, this is weird. Everybody is like matching and I'm not. And I'm like, oh, whatever. I don't know if it really affected my dancing career that much. I like to think that I'm a great dancer, but probably not. But maybe, who knows?
But that was a barrier. Yeah, no, I totally get it.
We'll get to like definitely like raising boys into the Tutu franchises, but I wanted to ask about lessons for you, and so maybe we can draw a few parallels here. What are the biggest things, the lessons you learned through ballet that then you readily applied into your business? And I know we talked a little bit about how they're similar, right? But you have a few concrete things that you're like, oh, you know what? I used to do that here, and I'm definitely putting that in my business, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the biggest one that I've identified is this thing. When I talk to other owners about it, I call it the step on the stage moment. That in ballet, there's so much emphasis on preparation. We take class every day. to keep working on our technique and to make sure we're keeping our bodies in performing shape. And then we are in rehearsals for hours. I mean, that's the bulk of what you do. The time that you're actually on the stage is really relatively small compared to all of the preparation. But even with all of that preparation and those incredible hours of rehearsal, there's still this moment where you're about to go on stage when you're performing, where you have to choose to step out on stage. And if you think too much about it, it seems crazy because there's like a theater full of people, there's an orchestra, and you're going to go do this incredibly hard thing, you know, that yes, you've practiced a lot, but it's still, when you stop and think about it, is really terrifying. And so there's still that moment where you could stay in the wings, like the curtain's gone up, the music's starting, and you could stay in the wings, but something propels you out on stage, like something leads you to actually step out on stage. And we obviously practice that in little ways every day in class, when it's our turn to go across the floor, when we're doing our rehearsal, and you know, so we get ready for that moment, but it still comes down to that actual second when you don't stay in the wings, when you go out on stage. And I think that I didn't appreciate at the time how much the training for that, the practice for like, okay, you could just stay in the studio forever, you could just prepare, but you're actually gonna have to go for it at some moment in time. How valuable that is, and all kinds of things, but I think especially entrepreneurialism, because you're never gonna feel completely ready. You can always find something that you feel like, okay, I could work more on this, or this could be in better shape. But if you have that ability to say, okay, nope, now we're going for it. If you have that ability to kind of tap into that second stage moment, I think there are so many times in entrepreneurialism and in running your own business that's going to come in handy.
I love that one. That one is such a good one. And I would love to hear if you have any example of how do ballet dancers deal with that moment. Are there different, like, what would I call it? Like traditions or techniques that you have in the industry that like we could also use in business?
I think that ballet dancers are notoriously superstitious.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of us definitely have backstage rituals, and it's like, okay, you have to do everything exactly the same way, before a performance. So there's stuff like that that's but it's usually, it's a lot of routine. So it's a lot of like making sure you're getting your body ready. There's obviously like the actual costume aspect. So there's makeup, crazy stage makeup you have to put on, as well as the costume itself. But most of the dancers I know do also take some time backstage. It might be a part of their superstitious ritual, but like some time just to center themselves, whatever it is, whether it's like a quick, basically meditation or a quick prayer or whatever, they take a moment to just sort of tap into like, okay, what is it that I'm going to go out on stage with? And like, am I ready to do that? And that was definitely the case for me. Like I would sort of have like a thing I would say to myself in my head that would just sort of put me in the right space for like, okay, yep, we're moving forward. This is what we're doing. This is why I want to do it. I think because I definitely would get really nervous. It was rare that I wouldn't be nervous before a performance. It did really help me to always stop and think about why I was doing it, and to make sure that I was gonna, not just go out there and try and survive a performance, or but that I was gonna actually get myself into the right space to really get into. I always like to think of getting inside the music, and there was, first of all, that was a place that was less scary than kind of being on top of it and trying to just project out to the audience. But that was also the thing that was the most fulfilling to me. And so I always wanted to go out on stage with that in mind, so that I didn't just give in to the nerves.
Oh, that's so awesome. And have you used that also like for big meetings and things like that?
I have, and I think where it's especially been important is that I think like in business you can just get so caught up in all of the day-to-day and all of the logistics and all of that stuff that it's really easy to move away from your why. And I know people talk about their why a lot now, to the point where it just sounds sort of cheesy, but it's so important. If you don't have that intention, if you don't have that why for what you're doing, then it's just a lot of work. And so I do, sometimes I wish and maybe I need to find ways to implement it, that I almost had that like, moment in the wings before I go on stage, where I would just sort of like center myself in that intention and that why before performing, and that I could find like that every day for business. I don't know that I found that yet, but I do I really made a lot of effort with Tutu School, especially in the last year or so. And I would say before that, because even pre-pandemic, to keep finding ways to articulate our brand values to everybody in the company, whether it's the teachers, the owners, staff, families, because I just feel like the more places that we can place things that are connected to our why for us to just sort of bump into throughout our day, it's like in our office, we have our principles are up on our wall. Everybody in the company has our mission statement. We put it in our, it's in our emails to all of our families. We just kind of like sprinkle it around like confetti everywhere. That means that it's going to help keep all of us tapped into that why too, as well as obviously communicating to all the people we work with.
Amazing. And this is a perfect segue to speak about your growing business into, or you growing the business into a franchise model. And I am super excited to talk to you about this because you mentioned there were a lot of things that you thought you wanted to do, you could have done before to set up the businesses in a way, thinking about growth. Do you want to talk to me a little bit about that, and maybe thinking about, like, if I was a new entrepreneur and I was starting something, should I think about franchising? Or should I think about growth? How do I think about it in a methodical way?
Yeah, no, I think that's such a good question because so first of all, I always just kind of want to say off the top of everything that I think that it's really great for people to think about franchising. I think that for a long time, franchising has just sort of meant French fries to people, and they don't think about that their business might be something they could franchise. So I just always kind of throw that out there, that I think that people should keep in mind the idea of franchising, because I think it's a really great way to scale a company. But I think even if I hadn't franchised, I really believe in planning for growth and for starting with the intention to scale. And I didn't do that to start, and I wish I had, because I think I would have just made some decisions differently. I think that if, like, when I started the very first Tutu School and it was just me in a room in San Francisco, if I'd already had the sense that, like, okay, at some point I might want to be able to share with somebody else how to do this, whether it was me opening more locations or helping other people open more locations, I would have from very early on probably put like great systems in place. I would have made sure that I was really setting up everything so that it wouldn't just be me who knew how to do it. I wasn't holding the operations manual all internally, or our curriculum or our teacher training, or, and so I think by planning for how would I communicate to somebody else how to do what I'm doing here, if I did want to grow, that will only ever help your business. There's literally no downside to that. So even if you stay with just one location, even if you don't end up becoming a multi-location business or however else you might try and scale, it's going to make your existing business so much better and stronger to have, clear processes laid out, to have things systemized like that, to have, to really have everything be thoughtful and intentional. And sometimes if just even, thinking about how you would communicate to somebody else how to run your business helps you examine it on a different level and in a new way, versus just sort of like, well, this is what I do naturally, or this is what I've always done. And so I think we obviously ended up doing that because we needed to in order to franchise. But if I could go back, I would have done it, as close to day one as possible, because I think it would have just made us even stronger from the start. And I think it would have made for an even more seamless process when we were ready to grow.
Why did that timing matters for your business, you think? Like, I know you said it would make for a more seamless transition, but and anything like, and I can understand that. What I'm hearing is like maybe you were scrambling to get all that stuff done in order to grow the business because you had the opportunity, kind of thing. So you would rather be more prepared from your ballet experience. Like, hey, I'd rather have been a little bit more prepared around that stuff. Anything? Is there some truth in that? And then anything else that why that would matter to do it from day one versus, like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, I do. Yes, that is what you're saying is very true. I think, like, in retrospect, personally, the timeline that we ended up franchising on probably worked out well in my personal life. So maybe any delay we had in kind of getting things together, because I was, still having babies and things like that, it still worked out, but we absolutely could have franchised faster. If we had that stuff in place. So what you said, there's definitely truth in that. But I think as far as other ways or reasons why it still makes sense to prepare for growth from the beginning. I just think it frees you up for more of the other things that are important. So, people talk a lot about like working on the business versus in the business, and those kinds of ideas. And I think that if you're not having to sort of constantly like reinvent your process for operating, if once you're able to just have like a thoughtful system in place for all of those things, and let's face it, they're not really necessarily always like the fun things that entrepreneurs want to be doing. I think that it frees you up for innovation and creativity in lots of other ways, and so I think having that foundation set, and again, thinking about it from the perspective of like, how would I communicate to somebody else what it is that we do here? Then you're able to start doing all of the other things that are really exciting about business and that can help a business grow and that can stretch it in new ways. But you need that foundation first. And I just think that is a helpful framework for setting that foundation, is thinking about, well, how would I tell somebody else how to run this business?
I like that also, in order to take time off, like if you're the only one that knows how to do this, you're always going to be an essential you're going to be the sun in the solar system. And
yes, that's huge. Yeah, 100%.
Right. And you cannot get any off time because everything runs around you.
It's so true. I mean, and we're still like finding things like that where we'll be like, oh wow, this is something that like only I to this point have held in this organization. And why this isn't something that I can't, this isn't something that I'm like uniquely qualified to do. For some reason, this is something that only I have ever done, and like I should really train somebody else in doing this, or somebody else needs to hold this information. And so yeah, I think I don't think franchising definitely taught me that. It's also not a one and done thing. Like I think I did think maybe more towards the beginning that it would be like, so we will create an operations manual and a program guide for our classes, parties, and camp, and then great, that's all people will ever need to run their business. And it's like, well, even if we hadn't franchised, even if it was just our business, the studios that we own, we would still need to be continually evolving and innovating, and you're still discovering things that you realize it's like, oh wow, we don't really have a thoughtful map for this. Let's create one. I think that's a part of it too, is knowing that it's not that it's not gonna be a one and done thing. It's gonna be something you're always going back to and tweaking and evolving.
Right. It makes total sense, and which makes me think of a couple of questions, maybe related. Like the first one is, how or where did you learn about franchises? And that could be something you wanted to do. And then if you could talk about like, is the first one always the hardest one? Like, the next one after your original one. And then does it get easier? Does it get harder? What is the critical mass that you need in order to actually then become almost a thing where you're like, oh, okay, we've done this enough times where this is the process is pretty smooth now, and anyone can do it.
Yeah. No, those are great questions. So I was very, very lucky. I truthfully don't even know if franchising would have occurred to me as a model to scale, except that one of my best friends had franchised her business very successfully. So she had a bridesmaid's dress boutique called Bella Bridesmaid that had also started in San Francisco, and that she franchised nationally, and again, very successfully. She since sold the company. Her name is Bridget Brown. And so because I had seen her do that, I was able to, first of all, just even know that was a possibility, a map that I otherwise probably wouldn't have had. And then she was also really able to mentor me through the process. And she does this professionally now. She has a company called the Advisory Guild, and she does this professionally, guiding entrepreneurs. But I got to be one of her first entrepreneurs, and so that was huge for me. And as well as then she connected me with a franchise attorney, which that's so much of the piece of franchising is the legal stuff, and so that really helped as well, was having that person on board early on to be able to lay the groundwork. So that was huge. And then I think as far as like the first, how tricky is like the first location. I think the way we did it was we opened the first one in San Francisco, and then we opened the second Tutu School ourselves without franchising in Marin County, which is just across the Golden Gate Bridge from San Francisco. And that was, in a lot of ways, that was the thing that led to being like, maybe we should look at another way to grow. What's franchising? Because it was great. The second location did really well, and I think actually not that it wasn't a challenge, but opening it was pretty seamless, but it was a reality check about, okay, so now we have 2 payrolls, we have rent in 2 places, it is a lot more to manage. And we could see we saw very quickly that it was very successful though. So we're like, okay, these Tutu schools could be sort of anywhere. And there's no way that I could possibly open them all myself. It was just that reality check of like, even if I can do a few more, there's no way that I can do them all myself. And so that's when we started looking to something else to do. And then the trickiest thing about the first franchise that we sold, which we ended up selling 7 years ago, Tutu School first opened 13 years ago. So it took us like a full 6 years from when we opened that first one to then, we decided to franchise probably about 4 years after that. And then finally sold the first one about 6 years in, was just finding the right person. And that proved to be really tricky because there were a couple people that we were really excited about, but that were scared to be the first. It was like a big deal to say, I'm going to take this leap and be the first franchisee of your company. And then there were a couple people that were excited about doing it, but that we didn't feel like were quite the right fit. And so that was actually the trickiest piece. And then once we found that first franchisee, who's an amazing woman whose name is Christy Pomarian, and she has 6 locations and growing. We were really that like it. Then from there it was pretty. It was not like it didn't have ups and downs, but it was a pretty straight trajectory up once we found her.
Nice, amazing. Last question about franchises: when to franchise and when to not franchise?
It's a really good question. So there is a difference between franchising and licensing. You have to be careful because I think that they're cracking down a lot at my senses. I'm not a policy expert in this or a legal analyst. But my perception from what I've heard is you do have to be careful about trying to call something licensing that should actually be franchising, because franchising is a lot more legally regulated. Sometimes people try and go the licensing route, and what they're really doing is basically running a franchise. And so then you can get in trouble for that, and you need to just go the franchising route. But I do think that for something that could truly be considered licensing, where maybe you have a curriculum you want to let people use, and so they're gonna license basically like your brand name and your logo and the curriculum from you or something like that. Sometimes that's a better fit for certain business models. Whereas franchising, it really is a sort of all in, like, here's the entire business. This is the paint color you're going to put on the walls. We are going to train you in X, Y, and Z. We're going to provide you with all of these different materials and tools. And we're also going to have a fair amount of say in how you do your business, right? So franchising is a much more sort of interconnected, involved model. Whereas licensing is more sort of, you pay me and then I give you some tools to go run your business. And so usually if people are asking me if they think that franchising makes sense for them, that's sort of where I start, is like, okay, well, so, how involved do you want to be in other people running your business? For me, it was very clear that I felt like, okay, there was no way this baby of mine, this brand of mine, was just going to sort of go out in the world without me getting to be very involved in, like, how people trained their teachers and the curriculum they were teaching, and everything down to, again, the Pantone colors on the wall and the trade dress and the spaces and all of those things. And then in turn, that I would be providing that level of support, that like really extreme level of support at lots of layers. But I do think that there are other businesses where I've talked to entrepreneurs where that business can definitely be successfully run with a lot less sort of involvement. And they can just sort of say, here are a few key components and I'm going to license this to you and then you can use it. And it's usually you're talking about less money then that you're asking for that, but you're also dealing with a lot less regulation, and so a lot fewer expenses on the legal side too. So that's usually where I ask people to start. And then the other thing is, if how many locations could you open on your own? If the way you're hoping to scale is through a multi-location business, what would you be able to do on your own, and what would you want to do on your own? I think that's another important question to answer too.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much. And believe it or not, we are unfortunately at the end of our interview here. Thanks for all your advice about opening a franchise, a business. Thank you for talking about Tutu. I want to hear about what are you doing next? What is Tutu doing next? What's going on with the business now?
Yeah, so we're currently at 53 locations that are open or opening across the country and Canada. Thank you.
Nice.
And so that's a really exciting place to be. Obviously,
Are you going global?
So Canada's our first, our first region outside of the U.S. So we're at least, we say we're international now. So we're at least starting. But that's obviously a really exciting place to be as we're, as we say, twirling out of this pandemic. So we're really just in a growth mode now. I think this pandemic was sort of a pivotal moment for a lot of people. I mean, I know everyone's talking pivot is like everyone's favorite word right now, but I do think that what we've seen is there are a lot of people who have been sort of thinking like, what do I want to do next? And so we're getting a lot of people who want to open tutu schools because they've decided they want to be entrepreneurs, that like sort of their next thing is to have their own business. And so that's really exciting because we're opening in new areas. We're opening up in Austin, Texas. We just opened in Nashville. We had a new school open in Arizona. We have some more schools coming to Seattle.
Nice.
We're expanding in North Carolina, and we opened our first location. It was supposed to open right in the middle of the pandemic, but in New York City. And we're expanding more in New York too. So there's a lot of expansion happening. We're excited to expand more where I am in Chicago. We currently have one studio there that is a corporate location. And so we're actively looking for new owners in the Chicago area because I think this is going to be sort of our next Bay Area. Where we started in San Francisco, we really grew a community of schools around that San Francisco studio in the Bay Area. And I'm excited to do the same thing here in my hometown in Chicago. So that's one of the things I'm going to be focusing on next.
That's so cool. I'm super excited. We need more tutus in our life.
I agree.
And that's a big thing for me. If anybody knows me, I'm like, I'm the last person to wear a tutu, but I totally believe in the power of the tutu. So take it.
I love, yes, I am. And then one of the things we always say at Tutu School too is it's like, yes, it's the tutu, but then it's those strong muscles underneath the tutu, and it's the grace of the person wearing it too. It's not just those fluffy layers of tulle. It's about what's in it.
That is an awesome message, and I think I want to leave the audience because I found it super interesting about you, the fact that you have 3 boys. I have 3 girls that are probably going to end up going to your school, but I also, if they choose to, but you have 3 boys, and your boys interested in ballet dancing.
Yes. So yeah, one of my kids especially like would live in a tutu if yeah. So we really believe at Tutu School, and we put a lot of time and thought into like a part of our mission just really being that ballet is for everybody. And I think for a while in the beginning, because we wanted to make it so clear that boys were welcome at Tutu School and kids of all genders were welcome at Tutu School, we actually kind of went the wrong way, like by saying things on our website like, boys are welcome too. It almost was making it seem like it was strange for them to be there in the first place. So we've really sort of shifted to make sure that now it's like we're just putting them more in our messaging and our imagery, and they're really represented in our ballet stories and things like that too, because we want to be careful too about there was sort of, I think sometimes people would experiment with the idea of like having boys only classes or somehow making sure the boys felt included in class by not giving them a flower and a wand but giving them some other prop, and it's like there was all this sort of gendering of the activities, which was also sending a completely wrong message to the girls. So we've really taken some time to step back and think about it, and we feel like, we are unapologetically pink and purple and sparkly, and we think that their kids of all genders can love those things. We would never want to tell girls that those are the only things they should care about, but we also won't want to tell boys that that's off limits to them, and similarly that when we like march like ballet dinosaurs or blast off like rocket ships, those aren't like special activities we're adding in just for boys in the class in addition to walking like fairies and galloping like unicorns. Those are all activities for all kids with imaginations, period, full stop.
Wow, I really felt that, and I'm so happy that we can be more gender neutral with these activities and more inclusive, and so thank you so much for thinking this through. I couldn't have picked a better tutu business to enjoy today. I'm super excited. Thank you for coming on the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been so fun.
Thank you, and I hope to see you soon again.
Yes, I would love that.
Woo! There you have it. I hope you liked this episode, and please don't forget to share, like, comment on the podcast link,
Tell all your next Western friends and family about it. Submit a recommendation for guests at www.unbossed.io. Subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Donate by clicking on the anchor link and help me continue to make great episodes. You can find all this information on www.unbossed.io. See you next time. Oh, that was good.